for a very fruitful conversation, and very just humbled to be able to have this conversation with our panelists today. We're really pleased to have an esteemed panel, you all. I mean, this would be the what I would consider the heavyweights within our field, within academics and student athlete development, and so on and so forth throughout our field. So really excited. We're gonna have a moment here and just take some time to introduce and have our panelists introduce themselves. And Dewan, we wanna go ahead and start with yourself. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself, and we'll move through the rest of the panelists.
Most definitely. Thank you, Aaron. First of all, thank you, N4A, for allowing us to speak on this topic. My name is Dewan Baker. I serve as the Diversity and Inclusion Director within athletics at Nebraska. I use he, him pronouns. I oversee all of our diversity and inclusion initiatives for our staff, coaches, and student athletes. And I'm also a member of the life skills staff working with our student athletes for their life after school.
Thanks, Dewan. And Gene, we can go ahead and have you introduce yourself as well.
Absolutely. Good morning, family. I hope that everyone is doing well and is healthy, and that you and yours are healthy during this incredibly challenging time that we're living in, where some have said that we are dealing with two pandemics. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic from a health and wellness standpoint, but also the issue surrounding race, which we're here to talk about today, has also been classified as a pandemic. I will fully agree. So I hope you're all doing well during these times and being active in conquering both of these. Gene Boyd, formerly, my title is Deputy Athletic Director at Arizona State University. Most of my career has been in the student athlete development space, and I'm proud to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Gene. Marcus, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself for us.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. Excited to be here as well. And I also say thank you to N4A for this opportunity. I'm excited to be on this panel. I know that the group that we have together, they're special. So I'm excited to take some notes. Hope that y'all don't mind if I participate a little bit along the way. Serve as our Senior Associate Athletic Director at Baylor, been here 3 years. And essentially, while that's my title, I think that I'm showing up every day trying to figure out how to push and pull people to be the best that they can be in all aspects of life. And I think our topic today really speaks to that. On a day-to-day basis, I am having oversight of our academic services and our character formation unit, sports ministry, B association, sport administrator, a little bit of everything, but all centers around just trying to help people be the absolute best they can be. And I'm excited for our conversation today.
Thanks, Marcus. And Ryan, the MC himself, go ahead if you could introduce yourself for us.
How you doing, Aaron? Really excited to be part of this panel. We've got an all-star cast here. Ryan Weissman, I'm the Director of Academic and Student Athlete Support Services at NYU. I do anti-racist work primarily through research, and I try to do evolving anti-racist educator as well. Most notably, my research focuses on the disparate impact of the NCAA APR on historically Black colleges and universities. So excited to have our conversation today. Thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thanks, Ryan. And of course, the best for last, Ms. Christina, if you can go ahead and introduce yourself for us.
Good afternoon, beautiful people. My name is Christina Worthy, pronoun she, her. I am the Director of Talent Development at the University of Louisville. So majority of my career has been in the academic and student athlete development space. And I recently made that transition to work into our athletics HR unit, where I'm oversee different training and development for our coaches and staff. I also do some student athlete development. I oversee our minority student athlete program, as well as serving on our athletics department diversity and inclusion committee. So right now, just like everyone else, we are working very hard to make sure that we have policies and practices set in place to combat racism as well. But before I leave, I do want to continue to send out encouragement out to you all, and thank you all again for being here, and thank you, N4A, for having me.
Awesome, and that is our group of panelists. Well, again, very excited. We're gonna go ahead and get our webinar started. And for our participants, if you have any questions throughout this webinar, please feel free to use the Q&A feature that is within the Zoom feature here at the bottom of your screen. We're going to attempt to answer as many of those questions toward the last half of the discussion. I want to go ahead and open up our discussion for all of our panelists. We'd like to just hear some of your personal experiences of racism and/or microaggressions. how did you react, maybe confront or educate those who you experienced this with, and how did this experience maybe impact your life?
I definitely have a comment to share on that and want to introduce the term microinvalidation. So, a microinvalidation is when someone tries to invalidate you in a small way. So, an example would be someone who says they don't see color. And that is definitely a microinvalidation just because, as a Black woman, that's something that someone sees automatically when they look at me. So, one way, anyone I encounter, I try very hard to educate them on that piece and say, hey, when you say you don't see color, you're neglecting to acknowledge a key part of my identity that affects, how people perceive me, affects the way how different opportunities that I have, and that it's not a bad thing to recognize that. It's actually encouraged. That way you can see the whole person and be able to visualize and understand where they're coming from in their perspective. Some common ones, oh, I talk like a white person. That's a very typical one to hear just because I may sound a certain way. I'm not exactly sure what that means. And just the typical one of people asking to touch my hair, or to more questions about my hairstyle than are welcome. And that just, I don't understand. I don't know why those questions come up, but just, I know people are curious about knowing about different things, especially when it comes to like a Black woman's hair and how we change the way how that looks. But just be mindful that when you do ask that question, it is offensive for people of color.
That's a good point, Christina. Did anyone else have maybe something to share in addition to that?
I throw two quick ones out. Speaking of color, I'm a very, what would be called fair-skinned individual. I'm biracial, and so I have two families. I've got a Black family and a white family, so to speak. I go probably every 4 or 5 years to a reunion with the white family, and we have a chat now, like a group chat through Facebook that we utilize. And over the past several months, as we've gone through all of the concerns around us racially and so forth, one of the cousins, a cousin of mine, second cousin, has posted a lot of very insensitive comments and pictures and commentary on that Facebook posting website. And, initially, you kind of take for granted that his family, you try to give him the benefit of the doubt. But my brother, who's, a very strong spoken individual, got into a confrontation there with him. And then a week later, as he was still dealing with it or still posting certain things, I came behind my brother and killed him with kindness and communicated some things that were historically based and factual and really challenged him to be considerate of his family, literally. And several of my family members on the back end communicated back to me that was very powerful, that it awoke in them. They hadn't really even understood that some of the things he was posting would be negative towards someone of color, a Black person in particular. And so that was a powerful one. The other one, which is a microaggression, is I work at a predominantly white institution, Arizona State University. We have a Black AD, a Black head football coach, an associate head coach of football who's Black, an associate head coach of basketball who's Black, multiple administrators who are African American. And so what I get a lot of times, especially in the state, is like, how did you guys do that? How do we do what? You have all those Black people in leadership there. Like, they let you do that? What do you mean they let us do that? Right? And so the inference is that either you're some way bending the rules to have more Blackness, or that's out of character or out of the norm, which it is for the society that we live in. And so therefore there must be something wrong with it. Very powerful microaggression that I welcome the opportunity whenever it presents itself to educate people on.
It's a good point. Good point, Gene. Dewan, did you have something to?
Yeah, just very briefly to kind of follow up on that piece with what Gene mentioned. It's something that I deal with here on a day-to-day basis here at my institution too, because I am a little bit younger. And I'm in very, very close proximity to the age of a lot of our student athletes. So a lot of the times if I'm in an Uber, Lyft, or just going around town and somebody asks me about my role or what I do, they automatically assume since I'm at UNL that I automatically play sports there. And so it's a reoccurring thought and a reoccurring reminder of, oh, there aren't very many of you around. You must be associated with the football team in some way, the basketball team, track and field, et cetera, right? And so I would say that it is a microaggression or a microinvalidation, as Christina mentioned. And it's something that I would at least say, hey, no, I'm a full-time staff member. This is what I do. There are a few more of us around the institution who do similar work, and I can try my best to connect them with you if you want. But I just try to make it more commonplace to say, hey, there are, a lot of us that are around who are capable of doing this work, who actually have the expertise. And I know I skew a little young and I look a little young, but I actually, am a full-time staff member and not relegated to just working with or being one of our Black athletes.
That's a good point, Dewan. I think all of those are very strong points, and the fact that it leads us kind of to our next area where there's just this miseducation. Christina, you spoke about just these microinvalidations that are around, and there's really just a miseducation and not enough understanding in it. And moving into our next question, Jean, we're going to go ahead and start with you first on this question, and then Marcus, we'll move to you second. As a white person, how do I better support my colleagues of color at work? I know this has been an especially difficult time, and I want to make sure that I can be a supportive and a caring partner.
The fact that people are thinking that way now is part of the solution. The fact that people are recognizing that they need to be a part of the solution and no longer part of the problem is powerful and gives us great hope. Toward the end, Ryan Weissman, who's done extensive research on a number of these issues, is going to provide some resources. So I won't go through a list of resources that would be helpful, although just so that everyone knows, we probably all have our lists, and we can send things out post this experience. But a couple of things that come to the top of my mind is, number one, just acknowledging that this is a human problem, not a Black problem. Being very mindful and very clear that this is about human rights. And it just happens that we're centered in the United States, a country that has a history of 401 years of both slavery and then all of the after effects of slavery. Institutionally, that there are residual realities in our existence, and that it is all of our problem as a country to fix and impact this and move this forward, and not just a Black problem. That's number one. And being willing to say that out loud. It's okay to say that out loud and acknowledge, that although you're not Black, it's your problem as well. Two, I would say, similar to COVID-19, we have to behave in a manner that everyone has. Obviously, if you are sequestered to your house only with COVID-19 and you don't go anywhere, then you can probably be pretty safe that, but because of the asymptomatic nature of the disease and the way that people move around, we have to acknowledge and behave in a way. I'm going to mask myself to protect you, right? Which is one of the debates that goes on nationally. We're certainly not here for that. But similarly, we all have bias, and white folks need to recognize and acknowledge that we all have bias, and those biases impact us. And the more in tune we are with those biases and we understand our self-biases, it gives us an opportunity to educate ourselves and be better custodians of friendships and individuals who are helping to promote change. So we all have bias, acknowledge that. Thirdly, then, educating oneself on the history of inequity in our country. So it's not enough to acknowledge that there's a history of 401 years that presents what we see today. You have to do some education, some self-education, become aware of some data. I was on a call with a number of student athletes. Kansas State and Oklahoma is a fantastic forum for student athletes and coaches and staff. And in the end of the session, there was a small group breakout, and one of the white students said, I just need resources, I need help in terms of how to turn the conversation from being a political one to one that has meaning. I said, hey man, arm yourself with some statistics about the disparities between Blacks and all other groups of people in this country, incarceration, socioeconomic level, right? Educational attainment. Arm yourself with some key statistics and then be able to put those right in the front of the conversation. You can't debate it. There is a discrepancy and disparity. So there are many different ways that you can educate yourself about these inequalities, and then be an ally. Be an active out, if you will, participant in being non-racist. My boss has been saying a lot here recently, you're racist or non-racist. There is no in between. So be an active ally, make a decision that you're going to speak up for these issues and will join into the conversation when you hear it with only your white peers or in mixed company too. You gotta have some courage in that regard.
That's good, Gene. Marcus, did you have some thoughts on that as well?
Yeah. Well, one thought is you don't go after Gene and answering a question. See, Dominic, dude just knocked it out of the park. Can I just retweet everything he said? I don't know if that's a possibility or not. But I think the piece I would add on top of all of that, because I think all that is spot on. The question spoke about, I think if I heard you right, it talked about support and caring. Mm-hmm. So I'll focus my comments there. Like, what does it mean to support and care for somebody? Like, if you recognize that someone's going through a tough time right now, and maybe they've been going through it for a while, maybe there's a, you step out of this context, maybe someone had a family member who they've lost, or maybe they have a disease, like any number of things, pick any of them. How would you support and care for them there? You reach out to them, you check on them from time to time. Everybody has different ways that they do that. If it's somebody that you say you love, you'll be patient with them, you'll be kind with them. Like, there's a number of things that you would do in a normal instance if you really are trying to support and care for. And to me, one thing I've been trying to encourage people to do is just do that. Do that. Reach out. If somebody who has, I'm not trying to compare this to cancer, but if somebody has cancer, like, you figure out what's going on with them. You reach out to them, maybe not every day, but every once in a while you check on them, see how things are going, see if they're still dealing with some of the trauma. How is that impacting their life still? You'd have questions. You'd want to know how treatment was going. All those things are things you'd be curious of if you're saying that you love and want to support and care for someone. To me, I think if you are able to do that, in addition to some of the things that Gene mentioned, I think that you'll be on the right track.
That's good. Thanks for that, Marcus. Thanks as well to Gene. We'll move on to our next question, which is similar. We had an anonymous participant ask a question, but it's similar to our next question that we're going into. What are some ways our athletic departments can make sure we are educating ourselves, having dialogue, applying good practices to really help fight anti-racism, for equity and social justice? We're going to go ahead and start with Christina on this question first, and then we'll move to you, Ryan, after.
I'll try to leave some things for you to say, Ryan. Just a few things that athletic departments can do is to first acknowledge the situation. That's the first thing that you'll need to do. And also to be intentional in what you do moving forward. So whatever your department is doing, you don't want to do it just to check the box. You want to do it because your department actually believes it and that your department stands by it. So that means that you have to provide financial support for it. Like, it has to be a priority. You have to provide manpower for it. So there's a lot of schools that are creating different positions that athletic departments will be using to address these different issues. And you also want to meet people where they are. I've learned from the best, and what the best have always told me is that data drives decisions. So how are you collecting data from your staff to figure out where they are and how you can meet them, and then provide the necessary support and requirements? And a lot of times when we're looking at different issues surrounding diversity, inclusion, equity, we have to be real, right? So a lot of times people haven't learned about this in school. They're not talking about it at home with their families. In the same way how we provide education to our student athletes, we need to be providing education to our staff members and our employees, and equipping them with the appropriate resources so that they do feel comfortable to engage in those conversations. And last but not least, just be very mindful in how you present that information and who you choose to come in and present that information. But you definitely want to start looking at your policies. What policies do you have set in place to help you, whether it's with recruitment or retainment of your employees? What procedures or programs do you have set in place around education? I know right now there is a mandatory requirement to do education around sexual, what's the word I'm looking for? A sexual assault and, Title IX, that's a requirement. Are you going to require diversity and inclusion training? So how are you letting your employees from the top down understand the importance of us combating racism as well as creating inclusive environments?
That's good, Christina. And Ryan, did you want to maybe add on or add some additional things into that?
It's hard to follow, Christina. I think your athletic department has to hire people of color. I think that's a huge necessity. I think if you have an athletic department with an administration and coaching staff that's not reflective of your student athlete base, there's an inherent problem in that. I think if you are not hiring qualified candidates of color to lead your athletic departments in head coaching positions and top senior level athletic department positions, and you have a student athlete body base that is largely people of color, I think that is where you need to start. You need to start questioning your hiring practices, and you need to be very intentional, just like Christina said, in bringing qualified candidates and recruiting qualified candidates to your campus. I think Christina hit the nail on the head. You know, there are a lot of well-intentioned statements coming out from athletic departments right now. I caution a lot of athletic departments that this could be a house of cards. You could be putting out very well-intentioned statements about support for racial justice and social enlightenment that's going on right now. But the reality is, if you don't have the structures to support that, that house is going to come crumbling down very, very quickly. We have an incredibly passionate student athlete base right now that's ready to make meaningful change on campus to support their peers. And I think one way that athletic departments can go to bat is to help to amplify those voices, especially when it comes to student athlete activism. You know, finding ways to help amplify the voices of students in your community and put them at the forefront and provide the support on campus to help them do so.
Yeah, that's great, Ryan. And that actually really leads into our next area as far as just how are we staffing, you know, really in this area, and how do we recruit, you know, how do we recruit more diverse candidates for jobs in college athletics? What resources are available maybe to help identify these candidates? Marcus, if we want to just jump off this question with yourself, and then Dewan, we'll move into you next, if so.
Yeah, so it's a great question, and one that I think requires a lot of intentionality. When I think about that question, I fall back on three things. One, starting with setting the expectation. And at least in the seat that I'm in, anybody who would consider themselves a leader, is designated or not, setting the expectation that we, as we go through a search process, we are going to have a diverse candidate pool, and that we're going to be intentional with doing so. If we lean on our connections to different people across the country, if we lean on understanding the different networks that exist, the different support systems that exist that have candidates out there that are looking for jobs, if we tap into those connections, it gives us an opportunity to have an actual diverse candidate pool. The second thing would be, so first is setting the expectation. Second would be starting to ask the next question. I'm going to be honest, there's been a number of times where I've tried to set the expectation, then I get a candidate pool and I'm looking at it and they just don't look as strong. Maybe there's some candidates out there that the way their resume is set up doesn't look as good as someone else's. They don't have the best language. And what I've tried to challenge our folks to do is ask the next question. Okay, so maybe they didn't eloquently express all the experiences that they had at XYZ institution, but that doesn't mean that we can't get on the phone and them have it, because who knows why they don't have it written on their resume. Maybe they've never been educated. Maybe they don't have a parent who taught them it when they were coming through, or maybe they didn't go to a school that taught them it. And they're just really trying to figure it out. They're really talented, bring great value to our team. How would we know if we don't ask the next question? And yeah, that requires more time. And our folks will tell you that our search process is pretty lengthy and extensive, but I think because we find the right person. And so if you set the expectation, ask the next question, and then have the conversation, like actually talk about it. I see on your resume, that you did X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me more about that? As opposed to just ruling people out because they don't have it written there. Or we've run into people who might have some type of biases toward or against, like folks who are coming from HBCUs or lower resource institutions, things of that nature. Because we're Baylor, and like, oh, let's back off our high horse, or whatever institution I've been at. So that's not to say that Baylor does that, but whatever institution that I'm at, let's back off our high horse and realize that there are some people that come from different places who bring great value to what we're trying to do. And how do we know whether or not they'll fit here? how do we know whether or not they'll be able to connect with our student, or, you know, whatever fill in the blank, if we don't have the conversation? So that's my 2 cents there. Set the expectation, ask the next question, and then actually have the conversation.
It's good, Marcus. It's good. Dewan, did you want to chime in on that at all?
Yeah, I definitely retweet the intentionality piece. One thing that we've talked about a lot here at our institution, and it's something that I think we all need to do better as an industry as well, is building your own. We have a number of student athletes on our campus, or I would guess that everybody on this call has somebody that they've worked with at their institution or a previous institution that say, you know what, that person is really, really talented, and I wish we could provide them an opportunity, but we haven't, or we can't, you know, whatever the circumstance is. We have a very, very diverse set of student athletes that we work with on a day-to-day basis that we can start to prep them as they start to transition out of intercollegiate athletics as student athletes. And so we really spend the time and energy making sure that they understand what athletics means, how there's a place for them here. We can start to build our own essential candidate pools from the student athletes that are going out into the world after they get through competing. In addition to that, there are a number of resources like Marcus mentioned. Ask your colleagues. If you are very genuine and coming to your colleagues and say, hey, I really want to make sure I get the best pool possible. I know that I can't do that if I don't get a wide array of experiences as people. Who do I need to talk to make sure that I can put this role in front of them and they can be a good candidate, like Marcus mentioned? There are also a number of organizations, whether that's, you know, utilizing N4A and some of the individuals in N4A, whether that's utilizing the MOAs of the world, whether that's utilizing the NCAA, the Leadership Development Center does fantastic programming where they are identifying minority leaders and candidates to be able to lead our institutions and our athletic departments one day. There are a number of institutions and organizations available that are building up these candidates and making sure that they can go out into our athletic departments to really lead at a high and efficient level. Identify those and be very, very intentional on saying, we want to connect with them and get their opinion and their thoughts on the roles that are open within our athletic departments to be able to put our athletic department in a better position and be more, at least racially and ethnically diverse to start off.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think it shows a level of just acknowledging to Dewan when the institution is behind the decisions that are being made. And, you know, you talked about identification. This is a question that is actually open to our entire panel. And the question is there a preference between being called Black or African American?
That's a hot one. Who wants it? because the range of that response probably, you know, within the Black community in and of itself varies greatly based off of, you know, people's personal preference, heritage, cultural awareness, you know, being from another country, etc. You know, so we got any experts on that one? I can give my opinion, but maybe someone has a little bit more expertise.
I have an opinion. I wouldn't say it's expert, but I also have an opinion as well.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Christina.
I would say, just like Jean mentioned, it's definitely a personal preference for that individual. I personally prefer Black, being called Black, as opposed to African American, just because there may be someone who is, you know, of color, but may not necessarily be from Africa. So whenever you use a term like, you know, Black, it kind of encompasses everyone that has that melanated skin tone, right? I will say some things you shouldn't say. So if you see a group of Black people and you say the Blacks, that's inappropriate. You want to add more context to it. So you can say the Black community, the Black people. And I also would encourage people to stray away from saying like colors. That's also something that we're leaving in the past. So just be mindful of your language, because your words do matter and they also do have an impact. But it's definitely most of the time personal preferences. But if you do say Black people, Black community, it reaches a larger group of people who are of darker skin tones.
That's good, Christina. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would agree that it depends, you know, to each individual. For me personally, I'm more conscious about African American just because I know people who would identify as like African born in America, right? And so then I feel like I know that's my heritage. I know that's where I come from. You know, I know that's the deep roots of who I am as an individual, I also recognize that like me or my immediate, my parents or my grandparents didn't come direct, they weren't born in Africa. And so I'm just a little more conscious about saying it. I sometimes will say it about other people, but I very rarely will say, call myself an African-American. But here's the other reality. I also don't like calling myself Black. Like I am, and I do say that as a Black male, as a Black, as a Black male, I recognize that, but I also recognize like the history of that too, and how the terminology of Black came. So it really makes me uncomfortable across the board. But if I had to choose one, and I know that that's kind of the world that we live in, where we have to put, where we tend to put people in buckets. To me, I feel more comfortable and typically refer to myself as Black.
And I would just add that, as we talked about already in the panel, educate yourself. If you're a white person who asks that question, educate yourself in terms of, the difference between, genetics and culture and heritage, because the interplay of these labels all draw from some of that. So, the more educated you are, the less ignorant you are at risk of being. But then as you get to know people, ask them, just like we would ask, someone, we're using pronouns at this point, right? Like, ask your friends, hey, what do you prefer? Because again, there is a range, and you want to be respectful of that individual's perspective in that regard. So it never hurts to tell someone, hey, look, I don't want to use a label that you don't appreciate. So I want to know how you want to be referenced. That actually has some power to it.
And Gina, if you don't mind, if I can just keep going off of that, I think that's where growth really happens. If we can start to have that basic level conversation, like if I could have a conversation around what I would desire to be called, like that opens up a door for countless other conversations and growth for us to have on both ends of the dialogue.
Mm-hmm. That's good, Marcus. I think
jokingly, I'm gonna say this half jokingly, but half not. If you're white, probably in no certain terms should you use the word that starts with an N and ends with an A or an ER. You all get the difference between that too, right? The Black community has so-called adopted the N word with an A on the end of it, and so there's inter-race debates about that. But in no certain terms, is it acceptable for a white person to use the N with an A or an ER? Just FYI.
Yeah, that's good, Gene. That is definitely helpful for those on today, just listening. We'll move into our next question as well too. From there, what's the best way to support my student athletes of color as a white administrator? Christina, if you could start on this one, and then Dewan, if you don't mind jumping in after.
Thank you. An excellent question. I'm going to echo the sentiments of hiring more people of color. If you really do want to support them, you have to make sure that your staff is diversified so that there are individuals that they see that look like them and that also they can connect with on a deeper level. Another recommendation would be provide opportunities and spaces for them to be able to be their authentic selves and receive support that will help them with addressing any challenges they may experience as a minority student athlete. I know at the University of Louisville, we do have an organization called SCORE that's geared towards supporting our student athletes through programming, and we're very intentional with creating those leadership opportunities. I will also say it's just to be authentic, be yourself, be mindful of what's going on in the world. For example, if you work with, Black student athletes and the day after, or the day of that George Floyd was killed, if you didn't check in on them or other events that are happening that they could be triggered or experience some type of trauma, that's just basic human principle, basics of showing empathy. Just provide that support, be authentic, get to know them, do your own research and education about the challenges that Black student athletes may face, but also be very intentional, like I said, with your hiring and your programs that you have available for them.
That's good, Christina. And Dewan, did you want to touch on that as well too, as far as the best way to support student athletes of color as a white administrator?
Yeah, I'd add one thing, well, build on one thing I should say is to be candid, you may have to get your feelings hurt a little bit, because specifically to Christina's point in building these spaces and communities specifically for our student athletes of color, there are going to be times where they're going to want to talk, converse, gather, and you're not going to be able to navigate that space as somebody else who is specifically a person of color would. So you have to be willing to say, you know what, I don't have the capacity or I don't have the life experience to be able to identify with that. So I have to be okay not being within the room, I have to be okay with not being a part of that programming right now, and just provide the space and let them have the space for themselves. I think that if you are specifically a white administrator and you understand that sometimes you're not always going to understand, and that you're willing to actually provide that space, and it doesn't really hurt you as an individual, then you can actually do a lot more good compared to harm. Because something that I've seen is we may have white administrators who mean well, but if they are inserting themselves into everything that they're trying to do specifically for their student athletes, there's definitely a harm that can be done by making sure that you are centered around their experience.
Yeah, I think that's good, Dewan, just really making sure that you're listening and hearing what, you know, they're saying, as opposed to trying to impose your own experience. And I think that really talks and covers into our next question. As a Black student athlete that is predominantly on a white team with white coaching staff, how can they better help coaches and their teammates understand cultural competence, empathy, and what white privilege truly means? And Jean, if you want to jump into this one first, and Christina, if you wouldn't mind commenting a bit after.
Yeah, this is challenging. This kind of gets to some of the crux of some of the issues in college athletics that we're seeing. Let's take NLI, for example, NIL, I'm sorry, name, image, and likeness, and this more recent push and adamcy that student athletes are able to use their name, image, or likeness for their own purposes. Well, what people have seen, and really the nexus of this, people have seen over the years the amount of money that has been generated across the student athlete experience, and yet the portion of that gets allocated to student athletes remains relatively low. And then there's an overrepresentation of African American men in football and basketball that are driving those revenues. And so that confounding element is being addressed through that process right now. But that trickles down into the space where these athletes who bring so much value, and all of our athletes bring value. So when we're talking about a particular issue in a particular population right now, these athletes that bring so much value to the institutions, literally in dollars and cents, are the most underperforming, the least graduating, and these numbers have all improved over the years. But and walk out of there with least ready to go out and excel and succeed in life. There's power dynamics where coaches are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, and they're making 10 times the amount of their sport administrator, let alone the student athlete. And so we're asking a question here that says, how do we empower a student athlete to be comfortable in a mostly white sport, to be able to go in there and educate everybody about these highly complex empathy and white privilege and all these kind of things, right? So on one hand, we have a responsibility as leaders. Every single person on this, there's 312 folks on here. I'm looking at you. You have a responsibility to be a part of this damn solution for these kids, especially the minority kids who are in predominantly white sports, who are dealing with the same things that Christina is dealing with, as far as the coaches talking about their hair and why is their hair to look like something, or the coaches not saying anything to them. We had some of our athletes come in and say, so when I say some of our athletes, we've been doing specific work with our Black athletes before and after these events. And we visit with them and they say, look, my coach didn't say anything about any of the events that have happened for 2 months until y'all had an all staff meeting where you said that the coaches better say something. So it got back to them that, the administration was saying this too, right? They're in a tough position, and we can't expect that they're going to become super empowered and superhumans at 18 years old. Because think about it, some of them are 17, 18. And, you know, they haven't even gotten their wherewithal about who they are identity-wise, but yet they're going to go in and be empowered or feel empowered to make that kind of impact in that sport. Everybody in this session is a part of the solution as far as that's concerned. So you need to be asking yourself, what can I do to help my student athlete be in a culture and a space that does allow them to be them full self, right? That involves also making suggestions and recommendations to your administration, your elevated administrators, your sport administrators. There's a lot more of those now than there were 10 years ago as well, about the culture and climate of their team. Is it recognizing all people, right? So that's a tough question. But the more that your culture is a space where they feel comfortable, this kind of ties into the question we just asked, about them being their authentic self, them being able to quote unquote keep it real, them being able to talk about their problems as a Black young person in the society that they're walking through, the better shot that you have. Go ahead, Christy. I think you were going to also answer on this, but I'm going to pull up a background and talk about that in a second here. Go ahead.
Yeah, Gene, you covered a lot of really good information. And just to dive deeper into this, providing space for the Black student athletes and where they can be themselves. A lot of times Black individuals, when we're placed into a space where we are the minority, or we're in a place where there are other people present that not necessarily may not look like us, we may go into something called code switching, where you adjust and adapt who you are based upon the group that you're in. So whenever you do provide these spaces for the Black student athletes to be themselves, they don't have to worry about code switching. They can talk the way how they want to talk. They can use whatever vernacular they choose to speak in. But again, it's just a sense of empowerment of them being surrounded by people who look like them, and be able to just relieve the stress of not having to worry about how you say something or how you look or how you behave. To add on to what Gene was saying, though, it's not up to the Black student athlete to educate, their coaches, their teammates. It's not up to the Black staff member to educate, their white colleagues and counterparts. So how are you providing opportunity for all teams to get educated to where you are showing your Black student athlete that you care about them? They're out there making money for the university. They are bringing in, different things, So how are you making sure that they feel comfortable being on their team, that they feel comfortable engaging with different people? So it is the priority and expectation of the university and the athletic department to educate them. But again, if you are a Black student athlete, if there are any Black student athletes watching this webinar and you're actually looking for tips, find your allies, find your team, your power team that will be there and support you. Find, the staff member, the coaches that you feel comfortable confiding in, that can be your voice and share that with senior administration. And if you are a white person or a colleague and you see that there's issue or you hear about issues, how can you use your privilege or how can you use your position of power to make a difference so that the burden is not on that Black student athlete to educate other people, to where the burden is not on that Black staff member all the time to be the person to even bring up an issue concerning diversity and inclusion. So we all need to take a look in the mirror and figure out how we can support the cause. But again, it's all of our responsibility.
Yeah.
I'm going to give just a quick example, Aaron, and I'll admit I'm very blessed to be at an institution that is predominantly white, but does have a heavy senior Black administration in some areas. And, that in and of itself is part of living the commitment to our student athletes, right? They see people in the hallways every day that look like them. And the guy who runs the whole thing looks like them, right? So that's part of it. They see those opportunities to grow in that regard. But then culturally, we've done things, again, as stated over the years, where we visit with our African-American student athletes. We create programming and bring programming specifically for them. We're not afraid to say, this is a program for the Black student athletes. See, some people go, oh, we shouldn't do that. That's singling them out. Damn it, they need to be singled out because there's some issues that we're dealing with that other people don't deal with. This is the video board in our stadium. It's one of the biggest jumbotrons in the conference in our stadium. And when this all played out, and our student athletes said, we want to act and we want to do some things. They wanted to do a march like a lot of people did, but COVID. Unfortunately, we don't know how to handle our business in COVID in Arizona. So we're one of the hot spots in the world right now. So we couldn't do a march with them. But what we did was we activated our assets digitally on this video board, and we put up Black Lives Matter. That's not necessarily saying that give donations to the Black Lives Matter organization. You may or may not want to do that, but Black Lives Matter, damn it, in our environment, on our teams, the realities that Christy and I both just mentioned about who they are, what they bring to these athletic programs, we better be willing to go to another level. And we didn't ask for approval for this. We did it. Now, everybody can't do that. You have to figure out what space and what your culture is, but you can make a difference in your own way. And you can damn sure make sure that these young people who are on these teams where they may not be comfortable being their full self, that the grown-ups, quote unquote, in the space are doing something about that. The sport administrators, the administrators overall, you all have pathways to those individuals to help impact.
Yeah. I think that's extremely powerful, Gene, just to be able to really listen to your students, as well as taking on the action that they might not be able to themselves. And as leaders, really showing that your institution follows that. We're going to go into our last question that we have as far as just laid out. Someone who is embarrassed about their new consciousness of racial injustice, and they're wanting to educate themselves about the Black, Indigenous, people of color, the community. What are some good resources that someone could use to start educating themselves? Ryan, if you wouldn't mind starting on this one, and Marcus, if you wouldn't mind closing us up there.
Yeah, I can't echo enough what Christy had just said. If you are a white educator, and educator is a very powerful word, it is not the responsibility of your Black colleagues and your colleagues of color to educate you on this. This is your responsibility to educate yourself on this. If you're thinking of where you're getting information, if you are only following white voices on Twitter or Instagram, that's something that needs to change, because there's an incredible power and there's incredible duty in being an educator, especially to students of color during this time. And if you are not educated, you are going to do a disservice to yourself, and you're going to do a disservice to your community. So I'm going to go through very quickly in a bunch of different modes of if you're a person who likes to read, if you like to listen, if you're a person that's on social media, different ways that you can start to educate yourself. And I will hand it over quickly because I know we've got some time for questions too, but there's a lot of fantastic books that you can start off with. Carol Anderson has White Rage and White Fragility, which is a great one. One of my favorites, especially if you're in the sports space, like we all are, $40 Million Spades by Bill Rhoden. $40 Million Slaves by Bill Rhoden is one of my favorite. Ta-Nehisi Coates, Between the World and I. Beverly Tatum's, Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting Together in the Cafeteria? The essay by Peggy McIntosh on The Invisible Knapsack. Those are kind of essential readings that you can start off with right now. Some of them are going to be challenging to get through, especially if you're new to this space and you're new to this consciousness. Some of these readings are going to be put you in a great state of cognitive dissonance, but this is the reality of what we're living in. If you're entering the freeway in the slow lane, racism has been going at Audubon speed for 400 years. So it's up to you to get yourself up to speed. If you're on Twitter, I love Worthy Notes, Christy Worthy at Christy Worthy. She's one of my favorite people to follow. At Jen Fry Talks, Risa Lovelace at University of Maryland, at RBL Theory 09. She has an incredible blog that she puts out that I suggest you all read. At The Undefeated and at Jamel Hill are just 5 good places to start. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but this is a way to start following some educators and people out there in the community that are doing incredible work. If you're on Instagram, there's an account called So You Want to Talk About. It's a social justice account in general, but covers a lot of the topics in terms of racial justice that we're talking about right now. There's also an account called Educators for Justice. And then there's also an Instagram account called Zinn Education Project. That's Howard Zinn's account. He wrote The People's History of the United States. That's a great book to read as well. Podcasts. Code Switch is fantastic. Code Switch has sessions that are like 25 to 30 minutes. Really, really fantastic. I recommend starting from the very beginning in 2016. It is an incredible series. If you're doing a road trip this summer, my wife and I just drove 5 hours back from Maine. We probably listened to about 25 sessions, but it is fantastic. 1619 in the New York Times is another podcast to listen to as well. Websites, jenfrytalks.com/resources, /resources. an incredible amount of resources there. Conferences, the Black Student Athlete Summit, University of Texas at Austin, happens every January. If you can get in, it is hard to get in. It sells out quickly, so make that a priority. Museums, National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC. There are an abundance of museums that you can attend to educate yourself. Netflix, watching even the 13th. There's a Black Lives Matter channel on Netflix that has an incredible amount of documentaries as well. I'm working with Christy McCrae, Dr. Christy McCrae at University of Otterbein. We are going to launch an educational webinar series in August that's called Ask the Dumb Question. It is for white educators, especially starting out, to ask the dumb question. And we're going to talk about things from its very roots, from racism to what is allyship. And we're going to continue that throughout the year. So we'll give you a little bit more information. It's a shameless plug, but I'll hand it over to Marcus now.
Ryan, I was trying to write some of those down, and hopefully we can get back to the live recording so I can get some more. One of the ones that he mentioned was White Fragility. He didn't hold it up, but it's a book by the same author. That book has been amazing for me because while I have a lot of lived experiences, one thing that was important for me to do as a Black man was to try to get into the psyche of another, right? Like, it's one thing for them, for whites to try to understand, white people to understand, like what white colleagues, whoever, to understand like where I'm coming from. But I think there's great value in me trying to understand, because I also recognize that they may not be able to articulate. They may not be able to articulate where they're coming from or what their experiences have been, or what their ignorance may be towards something. So let me try to help. Let me find some common language, some common examples that I might be able to use to help some of my white colleagues, white friends, engage in some of the conversation. So White Fragility, I got 3 extra ones on my desk, thanks to one of my coaches who knows that I'm loving it. And so he's like, here's some more, so you can pass them out to other people. And then I think that there's just, in addition to all those resources Ryan mentioned, I think there's very little that can take place of a conversation. And I'm not saying call people out of the blue, which I know has happened, which has been great. Call them out of the blue and immediately jump into, tell me all these experiences. Just know that gets taxing. I've been doing that a lot, and I'm happy to do it, but that gets taxing on me. But for my friends that I would talk to on a regular basis, sometimes we would avoid some of the race-related conversations. Well, instead of avoiding them, let's just have them, right? If we're gonna go out to dinner, if we're gonna hang out and watch it, well, I guess we're not watching games, but if we're gonna hang out and watch the Last Dance again or something, like, and you wanna talk, then don't be afraid to have a conversation about it and to ask, especially around those you feel comfortable navigating those types of conversations with. I think people are open to it if there's a true, genuine desire. I think one thing that I know that I've felt, and I've had to check myself on this, has been feeling like, well, do they really care? Or are you just asking me right now because you feel like you have to? And I feel in time, I'll know the people who really cared because it'll become a part of our conversations, as opposed to it being right now, heightened sense of awareness. It's all over your social media. You're calling me every week, making sure I'm okay. How am I dealing with the trauma, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, let's see what that energy, let me see if you keep that same energy a year from now. If you still care about what my experiences are. When you see us walk out of Target and they look at me twice, are you gonna talk about it or will you just ignore it? That's where I would really challenge someone who's looking to continue to grow in their consciousness to go, in addition to all those resources.
Yeah, I think that's great, Ryan and Marcus. Just phenomenal resources provided to be able to assist anyone that might be struggling with this or just trying to figure out how they can help, as well as learn. It's really all about learning and having the opportunity to be empathetic and understand, what's happening. This Q&A has been blowing up, and we have some phenomenal questions. I've been taking a look at a few, and we will most likely only have an opportunity to probably answer one of these. But I wanna really talk about one of the questions that came in from another anonymous attendee. They're wanting to know more about the stresses and fatigue for Black employees who have now become the go-to person for information about race. How do departments prevent what they're saying Black burnout by overly leaning and depending on minority employees to lead the charge on D&I initiatives? And this is open to our panel. If anyone wants to.
I'll start and try to go quick so somebody else can share their expert opinion on it. I acknowledge that that's a truth for me, and that there is I talk about it really in a lot of ways feeling suffocating. That I'm a Black man married to a Black woman with Black kids, and there's a lot that comes there. And then I come into a workspace, and I'm one of our leaders in our department, in my unit, but then also our bigger department and within the university. So there's a lot of people who are leaning on me in these moments to try to provide direction, and it's tough. But I also recognize that there's nobody can take that burden from me. I'm still going to have to do it. But what's beautiful is when I realize that when I'm in a room and somebody says a microaggression, or somebody when the what's the word I'm looking for, like systemic racism starts to creep its head, what would be great is if I didn't have to always hold the torch in that regard. Like, if you see it and you cringe, will you say something? That'll help me with my burnout. Like, because then I can sit back and be like, okay, cool. Now I can still join the conversation, but at least I'm not having to feel the additional pressure of, will I be judged by this? How will this impact my career, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Push through all of that, then say it, then still wonder all those things. But at least if somebody else is there, I know somebody else is with me. And I think that speaks to some of the allyship that we can have within our work settings.
Thanks for that, Marcus. Do we have any other final thoughts on that? Gene, looks like you got something.
I would just add that, for brothers and sisters on here who are African American, Black, or however you identify, I found it very powerful to create a network within the institution of other Black individuals who can caucus, who can chop it up, who can just talk. I started this at the kind of during the COVID early stages, where it was being talked about on CNN that there was overrepresentation of Black and brown individuals being impacted by the disease. And I wanted to talk to some of the men in the department about how we help our student athletes understand these realities so that they're not falling prey to the same things over and over again, right? These cycles, right? And then Ahmaud Arbery happened, and Breonna Taylor, and of course, George, and so forth. So this became a weekly gathering where we could come in a safe space and just let it all hang out, right? So I just would encourage people, even if you're on a small campus, you don't have many African Americans in the athletic department, you can do a cross-campus thing where there's, multiple people, but that has been a lifesaver. I mean, literally a lifesaver for me to be able to go into a space. And we put this platform forward called We 22. There was 22 of us. We wrote a statement, we sent it out, and we got 7 points that we're working off of now. And we got subcommittees for it. So we're doing something. This drives our effort in that regard. So it keeps us active too.
I think that's good, Gene. Thank you for sharing that as well, to Marcus, just for helping with that, because I think that's a reality that many Black African-American folks face within their field every single day, including myself. So I appreciate y'all answering that question. We are so thankful. We are really at the tip of our time at this point. I want to just give one quick moment. If anyone has a tidbit, final thought that they'd like to share on our panel, please do. But if not, we'll go ahead and wrap up here in a moment. But if anyone has a final thought that they'd like to share with our participants today, please share.
I have a final thought, and it's just something that I found on social media. So I'll just read directly from it. So it says, "There is no shame in being wrong, only refusal to learn. So get comfortable with saying, 'Thanks for correcting me. I didn't realize that.' Or, 'I hadn't thought of it like that. I understand now. I was wrong about that, and I've changed my mind. And I should do more research before I argue this point.'" So we are not perfect. We recognize that it's a learning process for a lot of people. But when you refuse to take ownership and learn, that's where the issues occur. And also recognize that it's okay for you not to know everything and that you may get corrected. But just taking that information, have a growth mindset, and figure out how you can learn from that and move forward.
I think that's great, Christina. And Marcus, you have something?
This is my soapbox that I've been on. I'll keep it brief. I just think we talk often about how we love our student athletes and how we love our colleagues. And I think we have a great opportunity to truly be love, like that we are patient with each other, that we're kind, that we're not rude with each other, that that if I love something, I don't allow something bad to happen to it. I stand up for justice. Like if we really want to love one another, then I think we have a great opportunity right now to be an example of that. And so I would just challenge everybody to be love.
Good final thoughts. Love that from you both. Thanks, Christine and Marcus, for that. Well, y'all, we are at the top of our hour. We're so thankful on behalf of N4A and its leadership. I want to first thank our panelists for just taking the time out and just providing your wisdom, your insight, just the knowledge that you've gained from your experiences and different conversations that you've been able to have. These are not easy conversations to have, very difficult, very challenging, but really the heart work conversations that we need in our profession to be able to see this thing changed. So we appreciate your willingness to help out and help our membership learn and continue to be anti-racist allies, really for our Black student athletes and colleagues. This concludes today's presentation. If you want to take a few moments as a participant, you will receive a brief survey that we ask that you fill out once this webinar has ended. And we're so thankful for you taking your time to be with us today. Thanks so much, you all.